Oh, I can't wait for
Welcome,
that.
Keira Moore, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'd introduce you, but I, I'm not going. I'll let you do it for yourself. No, I'm just joking. We've been BSing here a little bit, having fun, but we're going to be talking about sleep and life as a behavior analyst. I think. Tell me a little bit about your work and who you are and what you do.
Sure. I have been in the field of behavior analysis for, I think I figured the other day, about 15 years now, which makes me feel really old. And I got my start at the New England Center for Children, which I think probably a lot of people know about in Boston. Got really lucky and got an internship there when I was in undergrad and loved it so much I went back there and I got my master's degree through them and then later my PhD through Western New England while I was still working there. And I have done a little bit of a lot of things in the field. I worked as a research coordinator for UMass Medical School for a little bit. I ran a home service department at a small school in Massachusetts. And recently, I have taken a little bit of a hiatus from behavior analysis to be a full time flying trapeze instructor. And
Wow, random.
yeah, you probably weren't expecting that,
I did not see that one
huh?
coming.
didn't tell you that part before. So I have been kind of traveling all over the world for the last couple of years doing that full time, while part time kind of picking up my own consulting business, working mostly on sleep problems. And now I am back in the United States and out of money from doing flying trapeze for 4 years and getting back into behavior analysis full time. And I have my own consulting company now. I do specialize mostly in sleep problems and also in functional analysis and severe problem behavior. And things were getting up and running and moving along nicely. And then there was this whole pandemic thing. And now I'm kind of hanging
Derailed.
out and figuring out what to do next.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole club. We got special jackets and Dakota rings. It's
Oh, I didn't get mine yet.
the struggles are, it's in the mail. It's in the mail,
Oh,
just
good,
like
good,
everybody's
good.
checks. Well, why don't we start with the trapeze thing, and then we'll kind of go back a little bit because
That's so cool
Western
and
New
unique.
England. Did you work with Greg Hanley then, or
I
you were
did,
just there at the
yeah.
same time?
Yeah, so I met him in the PhD program, and that's where I learned pretty much everything I know about sleep, and worked with him a little bit on a few sleep cases and on some functional analysis research. And I have been keeping close tabs on his work ever since, and trying to keep in touch with him. But he's a very busy man.
Oh yeah, he's
But
elusive.
man,
Yeah,
I owe everything I know in the sleep realm to him and his students and all the work that they were doing while I was there.
yeah,
That's cool.
that is cool. So let's
So,
let's talk about. Why don't we talk about the trapeze thing? Because I
All
have to
right.
know how the hell did you even get there? Like, where does that happen? That's what I want
Uh,
to know.
yeah.
yeah, that so as you guys probably know, as PhD students, life gets really shitty sometimes. And I was in my third year of my PhD program and working full time and super stressed out, as I'm sure you guys probably can relate to, and looking for something to do just to blow off a little steam. And I went with actually a bunch of other behavior analysts, including Nick Vanslow, who I think probably a lot of people are familiar with some of his work that he used to do in the field. We got a Groupon for a flying trapeze lesson in Boston, and we decided we'd just go and do it to get a little break from the rest of our lives, and
Yeah.
we fell in love with it. We both started going back, along with a couple other friends, about once a week and blowing all of our money on flying trapeze. And then about 9 or so months later, the school we were taking classes at had a kind of mass exodus of staff that were going off to different circuses and things. And they were desperately needing instructors. And they were like, we'll teach you how to teach flying trapeze if you want. And I was like, cool, I'll do that. And then
Yeah.
that caused me to take an extra 2 years to get my PhD because suddenly I found something way more reinforcing to do and started spending a lot of time there doing that and less time on my dissertation. And hopefully Bill Ahern won't hear this. He was my advisor, and he, I think, is still a little.
A
Still a
little
little bit
sour.
upset about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Environments are tough.
yeah, I needed something, found it, and then
Behavior
ended up
goes where
really falling in
reinforcement
love with it.
flows, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
What were
And
you
then
doing? What were you doing? What was your diss on that
It was on anxiety in children with autism, which turned out you could apply to people doing flying trapeze as well. So
Yeah.
I kept trying to rationalize it with everybody and say like, oh yeah, my dissertation that applies to this. This is extra research here.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
why
yeah.
I'm at the flying trapeze school so much. But I wasn't doing shit with that.
So, so to say, I was going to ask, is the trapeze kind of like an outlet, a separate thing, or are you blending some of the behavior analysis and what you know and bringing it in?
I have definitely used a lot of what I know from behavior analysis in my teaching, especially as I have turned more to a full time flying trapeze instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And I have written up a couple of research protocols that I wanted to do with like clicker training and some tag teaching stuff with trapeze. And I've never actually been able to make it happen because it's always kind of a nightmare to get research off the ground.
Yeah.
But it's definitely helped me in my work in anxiety has helped me a lot to help work through fear of heights and stuff with people. So it's been fun. I ended up about 4 years ago, I decided I was just going to take a sabbatical from my full-time job for the summer and take a little time away and teach flying trapeze for the summer. And about a month into that, I called my boss and said, and he goes, you don't even need to say it. I knew this was going to happen. You're not coming back, are you? And I was like, no, I think I need to do this for a little while.
Yeah.
And then I've kind of been traveling around the world teaching trapeze, performing a little bit here and there. And it's been awesome, but I don't want to get too far away from behavior analysis. That's my first love. So got to come back to that eventually.
What made you come back to it? Just in general, just because? Like, did it get old with the trapeze thing, or was it more just kind of?
It's a little. I mean, I've always kind of kept a hand in behavior analysis and kept some consulting work going, especially in the sleep realm, which I really like. Um, but I think I spent last summer living in London and teaching there, and I was teaching trapeze like 40 hours a week, which is really hard on your body. And I am a very small person. And when you are spending all day lifting other people's body weight and doing all the physical things that go into it, it really starts to take a toll on your body. So after some time in London working full time and doing some traveling, I was kind of ready to come back home and find a better balance. So now I'm trying to do a little bit of both. I'm looking to keep teaching trapeze, but also kind of shift back more into behavior analysis. Also, money. Flying trapeze doesn't pay well.
Yeah.
You can only do that you can only travel around and do that for so long.
That PhD debt is real.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it's a different. You level up pretty hardcore as far as your needs.
Yeah, you go from a good solid career with benefits and stuff to like, hey, you're gonna make minimum wage and put your body on the line, and we don't do benefits in circus world, so you're kind of just on your own. But
you gotta like. So were you actually traveling with circus? I mean, like.
No, I was never traveling with a circus. I was moving around to different flying trapeze schools. So I spent a couple years in Seattle teaching at a school there where they have it should be its own reality show. They've actually tried to get a reality show there. It's this old factory building that has been converted into a flying trapeze school. And it's just like this super cool space when you go in there. It's this old, like wooden beamed building. It's beautiful. And they have all these secret rooms where the staff live. And nobody's supposed to know that the staff are living there. So at any given time, there's like 15 to 20 acrobats and flying trapeze instructors and trampoline instructors that are living in this trapeze school, like old factory building. And we're there 24/7 and we teach full time and we train when we're not teaching. And it's a big, it's like a reality show. It was a crazy place to be, and I spent 2 years there. It was
like
super
circus
fun.
folk level, like television, like
and circus people can be crazy. So there's like there's always stuff going on. There's a lot of excitement.
You got the guy juggling knives and
yeah. It would make a great show. They tried a couple of years ago. Apparently there was a sizzle reel.
What's the weirdest thing you've ever seen with those people? I just have to know.
Ooh,
top.
I don't know if I can say because then it implicates me in it. I mean, you can imagine what a group of 20 acrobats could get into at night when they're running around a trapeze school by themselves and drinking and being
I bet that
stupid.
Gets weird.
So it sure does.
Okay. All right. Well, then I guess we can switch gears. Why don't you tell us then about your consulting business or your situation with going back to sleep? So you came back to the states and you kind of started this consulting business situation, and you're doing sleep work. Um,
Yeah.
so your dissertation was in anxiety. So then, what
Mhm.
was the transition to sleep? Where did that just out of interest, or
Yeah,
you saw a gap?
I took a class with Greg Hanley where we covered sleep pretty extensively, and it was something that I had never really thought about doing before. Like, I just didn't really think it was something that we could do as behavior analysts, and I had never thought about it. I have always been interested in sleep. It's like my favorite thing to do, and I'm pretty good at it, so I would consider myself an expert just by my own
By
behavior.
living, yeah,
Yeah, so it's always been something I've been really interested in, and when we covered it in Greg's class, it was sort of a light bulb moment for me of like, oh, there's like so many of my clients have sleep problems that I could
Yeah.
be helping them with that I never even thought it was something I could do. And he gave us a pretty Greg, I'm sure as you guys know, has a really good way of taking a lot of really complicated things or like a lot of different studies and boiling it down into these sort of simple and easily applicable formulas
Yeah.
for assessing and treating. And he's done a really great job with that with sleep, and learning from him I was like, oh man, this is something that I can do and it's easy and it makes sense to me. And I kind of just started trialing some of what I learned with him with clients that I had at the time and finding it was super successful, which is really exciting because in behavior analysis, when you're working with a population of kids with really severe autism, you don't often have things where you see immediate success that has as big of implications as success with sleep does. Like that really affects every part of their life and their quality of life and the quality of life for their families. So it's super reinforcing as a practitioner to get into sleep work. And it kind of started there and then snowballed into like, this is the thing that I want to be doing. And thanks to Greg, I was able to get a lot of consulting cases kind of rolling in over the past
Yeah.
couple of years. So when he would get sleep cases, sometimes he would send them my way if he wasn't able to take it
Yeah.
on at the time. So it's been great. I really enjoyed doing it.
I wanted to talk about sleep itself for a second. So I was reading this morning, and it's really interesting because it's, I think, described best as like this biobehavioral state. Like,
Hmm.
is it behavior? Is it not? And the whole question of like, is it operant? Is it respondent? And my understanding from reading whatever it is, the chapter that was in this APA Handbook of Behavior Analysis was that it doesn't seem to be really fitting in either. Can we maybe pull
Yeah.
that apart a little bit?
Yeah, I think the best conceptualization of it that I like is that biobehavioral state, which is a bit hard to kind of wrap your head around as a behavior analyst, I think, because it doesn't fit neatly into any category of behavior. But it's sort of like things like digestion or I've heard pregnancy being called a biobehavioral state. So things like that that are it's something that you're doing and that your body is doing, but it isn't operant because it's not something that we can change through consequences. It isn't really respondent because it just kind of doesn't fit into either of those. But I think it is still behavior on some level.
And I would agree there in the any of these biobehavioral states, like how you alluded to pregnancy and such, like it's so fascinating because it makes me think about how we have these distinctions of operant and respondent behavior, and it's almost ingrained. Like it has to be one of these two, but those were just conceptual, like conveniences, really, where most things were falling, and it doesn't have to be that way. So yeah, it seems like it's still kind of like a it seems like behavior. We'll call it behavior, but it has these different properties.
Yeah, I think that if you really wanted to make a definitive answer on is it behavior or is it not, it doesn't fit into any of our categories of behavior neatly. So I feel like if you had to go one way or another, I'd say then we don't call it behavior. We just call it like a biological state. Um, but the interesting thing to me is that sleep in and of itself isn't the behavior that we target when we're talking about doing sleep assessment and treatment. It is the reinforcer, really. and it is a unique thing in and of itself, so it kind of makes it a little bit tricky when we're talking about it. But then when you realize that sleep itself isn't the thing that you're targeting, and it's more the things that are happening right before sleep, then it starts to make a little bit more sense. So I think that's where a lot of behavior analysts sort of get lost in, like, well, sleep isn't really something that we can deal with, and maybe that should be doctors doing that, or psychiatrists, or whoever, because it's not behavior. But everything
They
that
go
leads
to
up to it
chemistry,
is.
basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, I think, what we do in our field a lot when it's something that doesn't fit neatly into our concept of behavior, like things like anxiety and different like depression and things like that. And there's some really good behavior analytic conceptualizations of those things, but it is really hard for us to wrap our heads around. So it's easier to just be like, yeah, that's not in our realm.
Do
Yeah,
you yeah, because I guess when I was trying to think about this earlier, I'm thinking like that's kind of teaching to a dead man almost.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
really it's not, because you're alive obviously and you're just not moving. So being in a state of non-movement means that you could be necessarily, or you could be potentially still behaving in some capacity. I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
that biobehavioral thing is not even a thing that crossed my mind, so that's fascinating. Yeah.
yeah. There's just like a lot of inhibited responses at that time, is my understanding, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's still a lot going on in the body and in the brain, and a lot that we don't even really understand. There's a really awesome book by Matthew Walker called "Why We Sleep," and he's basically a psychologist who is a sleep expert. And this book, he does a really good job of explaining the biology of sleep, but explaining it in a scientific way, but in a way that your average person who doesn't know a lot of scientific terms and have a great understanding of how to read research can understand. So that's been really helpful for me, because I think you do have to understand a certain amount of the biology of sleep to be able to successfully treat sleep problems and understand how behavior affects sleep. So
Why do we
that's a
sleep?
really good.
what's
Now I want to
Why
know.
do we sleep?
Yeah, why do we sleep?
Oh, that's a long answer.
Yeah,
I mean, there's
we got time.
yeah, yeah. There's no short answer to that. There's a lot of biological reasons why, which I definitely am not the qualified scientist to talk about those things.
This is a
Um,
podcast where we just talking a little bit shit. So you're
yeah.
yeah, we just.
If you
just
can
tell
give
I mean,
us,
I can just make stuff up.
yeah,
you're good, man.
you
Just
can
go.
give us
Like
maybe
I
just
mean, you give
whet
us a
our,
bird's eye view. It's fine.
yeah. I was gonna say just a bird's eye view of like whet our appetites a little
Yeah,
bit of some of the
that's
things.
fine.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's a lot of eh, the way they sort of conceptualize it is resetting the brain and the body, and basically you can't survive without sleep.
Yeah.
You have to be getting sleep in order to function. It's a lot of there's a lot of, I guess, neurologic things that go on that I couldn't explain to you
Yeah.
without having that book straight in front of me. But when you
Yeah.
read it in the book, you're like, yeah, okay, cool, got it. Um, but it's basically how your body and your brain reset, and that's how you are able to wake
Do
up
everything
and
else that
do
you do,
all the
right?
things that you
Like-
do. Yeah.
A while ago, a psychologist described it to me as like that's where your quote unquote short term memory starts to transition into long term memory. So your brain kind of goes through like the day's events and decides what it needs to keep and what it doesn't need to keep, like what was valuable, what's going to have
Yeah.
survival value, and it keeps whatever it thinks it needs and it gets rid of whatever it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah,
Cleaning your
I
cookies.
hate talking about it like that, because I hate talking about the brain like it's
Well, and
like
that's
it's
why I
this
said
big
a
file box,
psychologist
but
told me that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I mean, that is the way that it gets talked about, and sleep definitely has huge impacts on memory. I think even the people who understand the most about the biology of that still don't really understand how that works or why
Yeah.
that works, but they are finding a lot of really important links between sleep and Alzheimer's and things like that. And sleeping, like in the earlier part of your life, your sleep habits can have a really big impact on whether or not you develop Alzheimer's later in life. So there's a lot of super interesting data
That's
on
interesting.
sleep and memory. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
fucked.
Like if you don't want to get Alzheimer's, you got to learn how to sleep now.
Yeah, I'm fucked. It's over. I'm already tripping.
Oh
Those-
yeah. If you're in a PhD program, good luck. You're not getting sleep.
I don't know if this is still accurate, but I also remember him saying that like no one has ever died of sleep deprivation. Like you can't physically die of it, but you start to do micro sleeps. So you actually like almost fall asleep for microseconds at a time.
That's
so
what
your
I
body
read this morning.
needs
actually.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really? I thought that people can die from sleep deprivation.
Apparently, your body won't actually let you not sleep.
Yeah,
Oh, I see.
That's
So
my
it's not
understanding of the reading. But
Okay.
let's volley it over to Keira.
Yeah, I think
we need an adult.
that there's no evidence that it's a direct result of not sleeping, but the effects of not sleeping will deteriorate your body to the point that you can die. Like there is some condition, I can't remember what it's called now, where people like can't sleep and they will eventually die, not directly from not sleeping, but from the effects that it has on your body.
All the physiological effects that result
Yeah.
for not being able to
Yeah.
rest.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, but sleep is obviously important. It affects
It seems to
pretty
affect
much
all
everything you do.
facets.
Yeah, it like your physical health, your mental health, your ability to focus, your ability to learn.
Is it called fatal familial insomnia?
That sounds familiar.
Okay. We'll link to in the show notes and people can explore it. We're not
Yeah.
sure. But the
every time we talk about sleep, it makes me think of it just makes me think about inception and dream states, and I always want to talk about it in terms of neuroscience because that just seems to make the most sense. Because
yeah, definitely. I think like the actual act of sleeping in and of itself is fascinating, and I've always wondered like how can we explain dreams from a behavior analytic like philosophical view, because it is behavior on some level, right? And if we don't, like, I really hate that conceptualization of like your brain as a file cabinet and like things popping up and like
yeah.
all the interpretations of like dreams as ways to like work out your problems. Like it's got to be some biological process that's happening that we don't understand, but I don't know.
That and like we've been a lot of these analogies, like the brain stuff we've been talking on and off about is like usually distilled pretty simply, not completely, but a big part of that's just like talking around stimulus control, what stimulus control is going on. And when you can start to identify those sort of things, then it seems to get a little bit more parsimonious and easier to describe, is my understanding. Dreaming, sleeping, all of those.
Yep. Yeah.
Dixon's got a paper on dreams. I gotta be honest though, I wasn't super convinced by the analysis. I feel like any explanation of anything that happens while you're asleep without neurochemistry involved and without assigning it causal variables to those factors, it doesn't really jive with me. Then it's just too constructed and conceptual. Because it was definitely an interesting read in the stimulus control and talking about how those types of environmental contingencies can mitigate or control those things, exert an influence over those things is interesting, but it just it didn't seem satisfactory, honestly.
Yeah, I have my own hypothesis of what dreams are and how that works, but I mean I have like just totally pulled this out of my ass. I have absolutely no basis for this.
Number one, this is America. No one believes in experts anymore.
Yeah,
that's true.
Number two,
that's true.
we're just having fun. So I mean, like, this is not.
I think that there's some biological or neurological something going on where certain neurons are firing that either have fired when you are doing certain other behavior or having certain other experiences. And like we only remember dreams if we wake up like right after it and are thinking about it, right? And sometimes it's hard to even remember it later. My hypothesis about that is that there is certain neurons or whatever that are firing in your brain that are similar to some recent experience that you had, and that is somehow eliciting certain feelings that you are then associating with other things. So it's all like a weird stimulus control and like what kind of behavior you're already sort of predisposed to have, or and that's meaning like thinking as behavior. So I don't know. I think dreams are a really interesting thing. I wish that somebody in behavior analysis would study it more.
The other
cool neuroscience. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say the other
scientist.
Go ahead.
Go.
I was going to say the other cool interpretation that I've seen was a 2017 article from. Wow, it was Dixon and Hayes that did this. I'm an idiot. I'm a fool. I was going to say Linda had a piece out there. You didn't dig it, huh?
I mean, it's not bad. It's just, listen, man. I like Steve Hayes. I like Mark Dixon. I think they're
Linda's on this one.
Geniuses in what we do. Say what?
I said Linda's on this one. not
Linda. Oh,
Steve.
okay. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah, Linda Hayes. Okay.
yeah,
Regardless, though, Hayes X
yeah,
Hayes
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah, yeah.
brilliant people. Okay,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, I do think that it's a philosophical piece, which means that it's subject to deductive
Yeah,
analytical
yeah, yeah.
reasoning and
Okay.
analogical examination, and there were some deductive holes in it that, or are reasonable to poke into if you want to get into the nitty gritty of like the soundness of the argument that they're
Mm-hmm.
making. That's not to say that it's not an absolutely compelling argument that they
Yeah,
give,
yeah,
or
yeah.
even like
Okay.
or description that they provide. But I mean, there's just it left me a little wanting for the lack of neuroscience, neurochemistry, and neuroscience that I think is required for that to be a substantive perspective, like in
Yeah.
terms of scientific point of view, not in
Cool.
terms of conceptual framework. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Okay, Dave. Okay, sorry
Yeah,
for even
absolutely.
getting down that
No,
tangent. What were you
no,
gonna say
you're good. I'm
before
glad you
that?
looked up the paper because I wanted to say it was Hayes, and I remember Dixon was on it. 'Cause I was like, I know
Yeah.
that they both work in relational stuff, but I didn't think they were like partners and things all the time. But
Yeah.
there you go. There's this. What I was going to say is there's this neuroscientist Moran Cerf. He's a French guy, and he was the one who consulted on Inception, and he's done some studies where where if you can isolate, like where they isolate the areas of the brain where they find that you're dreaming, when they hook you up to an fMRI, and they can actually insert particular interruptive pulses to
Mm-hmm.
operantly condition dream states. And
Yeah.
that was the whole thing that they based Inception on, was because
Yeah.
technically, theoretically, it's possible because of the way they do that. And they're able to eliminate or minimize smoking cessation that way through
Yep.
your sleep, and a lot of just fascinating manifestations that they can get in terms of over behavioral responses across your lifetime, or like across your day to day, just by interjecting into your sleep states, which I thought was just like unbelievable cool stuff.
Yeah.
So
That
for the
that
listeners
stuff is
out
really
there,
cool.
Moran Surf, check him out. I think he has a book called like The Science of Dreams or something, actually. So
Cool.
cool.
Well, and like if you can train yourself to become a lucid dreamer, then there must be some
Yeah.
component. Like
Yep.
there must be some operant component, because I've heard that you can become better and better at interfering with your dreams, almost like that
Mm-hmm.
you're aware
I
that you're.
lucid dream. I lucid dream, like that's how I dream for the most part. I usually get stuck at some point and it becomes terrifying, but yeah, I'm definitely like there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think you can't possibly understand any of those sort of biobehavioral states without the bio part of it. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
you have to know understand the biology behind what's happening. But I think also, I mean, with all that stuff, like if you're dreaming a lot and remembering your dreams a lot, it's probably a good indicator you're not a good sleeper, because you shouldn't be waking up that many times at night that you're like awake and thinking about your dreams. If you are consistently waking up at a time in the morning when it's interrupting REM sleep and you're getting woken up in the morning in the middle of dreams, that's sort of a different thing. But yeah, it's interesting. It's something I wish I knew more about, but that is not my area of science
Hey, it's
yet.
fun to talk about though. It's fun to talk about. It's
Yeah,
fun to go down the rabbit hole. So
yeah.
what? So what? Well, let's talk about a little bit pragmatic. Let's be pragmatic then. What you mentioned that it has to deal with the routines that build up to the sleep process, which again
Mhm.
I agree, because anxiety, depression. I mean, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Where if you construct enough contingencies around that, enough preventatives and other types of alternative behaviors that just automatically skew the matching away from that problem, you can slowly gain the time away from it to where it diminishes. Tell me, like, how does that work exactly in regards to sleep, or even
In regards
anxiety,
to
honestly, because that's, I mean, if you did
yeah.
fixation on that, let's talk about that too at some point.
Yeah, so with sleep we're always looking our target behavior is really falling asleep. But it is not just that particular behavior of falling asleep. It's sort of the behavioral chain that leads up to that. And there's a few researchers, Greg included. I'm not sure who coined the term initially, behavioral quietude. I want to say it came from the Blampede in France article, but I could be wrong on that. But behavioral quietude is what you need to be able to fall asleep. So that's that period of time that you are just lying still and about to fall asleep. So those are the things that those are the actual target behaviors that we target when we're talking about treating sleep problems. And then, of course, sleep is the reinforcer for that chain of behaviors of falling asleep. And so, in a sense, it makes our job easier when we are assessing or analyzing sleep because we already know what the target behavior is all the time, and we already know what the consequence is all the time. So it's like half of our equation is already like got that figured it out. So it makes it a bit different than our typical work when we're analyzing behavior, where we're really staying on the antecedent side more, and we're really looking at what are the MOs, what are the SDs, and also kind of the flip side of it of what behavior is interfering with falling asleep, and then what are the MOs and SDs and reinforcers for those behaviors. So it's kind of cool to me because it's it's a lot more limited than a lot of other behavior problems that we talk about, where like we've already got a lot of the pieces figured out and there's only so much that can be going on here that we
Yeah.
can kind of sort it out easily.
Yeah, when I was reading the interpretation out of the book, it was alluding to, like, they were interpreting like what are some things going on here, and it seemed just like a ton of stimulus control around MOs, like you're saying, with the interfering or the actual behavior itself, and like the nighttime routines and self soothing and stuff. Like it seems, I don't know, nothing's always simple, but like it's pretty confounded, I guess, right? Or like
Hmm.
box, you know what I mean? Like there's a limited, I
Yeah.
guess, right?
Yep. Yeah,
Um,
that's I think what I like so much about sleep work is it is literally that easy. Like
yeah.
it isn't hard to figure out what are the motivating operations that make sleep more valuable, and like what are abolishing operations that make sleep less valuable. Like
Yeah.
there's only so many things, right? Like we can narrow those down pretty easily.
Is a big part of your
Um,
job then like kind of working on interpreting and helping people understand like why they've got to do this, why they've got to be consistent then, like working with parents then?
yeah, I think a lot of people understand surprisingly little about sleep, including behavior analysts. And I think learning how to conceptualize sleep problems as behavior problems for behavior analysts really helps us to kind of narrow in on how to treat them. But when you're working with parents, especially parents of kids on the autism spectrum, it's a lot of explaining sort of why certain things that are currently happening are not good, or why those things are causing sleep problems and how to fix them, and why we do things in a particular way. So when I do sleep treatment with kids, especially on the autism spectrum, I have a pretty like I always use Greg's sleep assessment and treatment tool as my assessment, and I have a pretty straightforward sort of template for treatment that I use that has like certain kind of target the same sections every time, and I individualize how I'm doing each of those things with the family. But it's pretty straightforward, which for me is a unique thing in behavior analysis. Like nothing's ever that easy, and
Well, it's a lot of. It's probably just a really. Now that we're talking about it, it makes total sense why Greg's Red Hanley is into this, because it's holistic. It requires an examination of lifestyle factors. It requires a comprehensive behavioral health history. It just requires like a telescopic view of a person's situation, instead of just looking at a micro three-term contingency response and just breaking down,
yeah,
basic
yep,
connections and relationships, because you really have to think about, what are the conjunctive behaviors that are going on at the particular instance, and also like what are the variety of other types of influences that are exerting control that might not be logically there when you're just looking at the problem, because they're not necessarily present at the instance of your analysis or your investigation.
yeah, and you're almost always with kids, especially you're almost always looking at behavior of more than one person. Like it's usually not the
Exactly.
child's behavior that you're changing when you're doing sleep treatment for kids, it's the parents' behavior.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part, I think, with sleep treatment, is getting parents to change their behavior and getting them to stick to trying something different, and getting them to understand why you want them to do things differently.
Do you is part of the diagnosis or part of the prescription that you write in terms of planning, does like how much does physical exercise and other types of things like that fit into it, or is it mostly just nighttime routines and, like, I don't know, some type of mindfulness or anything like that, or even if that's not even the case, I don't know, because the
Yeah,
only
so
the only sleep stuff I know about, other than like the broad stroke Hanley stuff, I know that there's a technique that Navy SEALs are taught to be, and they actually are forced to train to be able to fall asleep within like 3 minutes or something like that, 2 minutes, and it becomes a thing where they can just literally clonk out. And I think about that as a horrible sleeper myself. Like, I mean, it's
I want to talk about that afterwards. Yeah,
without
let's
chemical
separate these.
induction, I can't do it. So like, I can't even. First of all, meditation literally makes me go insane because I mean, my brain is too noisy. So like, I can't. Silence is the enemy. So I mean, like, what is
It's an important skill to learn, though.
We're all works in progress. You know, no one's perfect. You know, we're all works in progress. You know, but
Yeah,
I mean,
I tell a lot of adult clients that's one of the most important things you can learn if you are having sleep problems as an adult is learning how to meditate and learning how to kind of take control of your own inner verbal behavior that's going on, and that can be really, really hard as an adult, but important.
oh yeah, absolutely. Person like how would I call it? Self-injurious schizophrenic voices. No, I'm just kidding. It's like self-verbalizations.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so what is that? So what are the types of things that typically you need to think about when you're doing that? What does the process generally look like?
Screen time.
I know, like that is.
Yes. That
Fuck,
is
man.
one of the biggest ones. So there's definitely certain like general recommendations that I'll make to people like that of like getting rid of screen time at least an hour before bed, trying to make sure that there's exercise going on during the day but not too close to bedtime. Little things like making sure that you're not eating a meal right before bed because you don't want falling asleep to be dependent on blood sugar being at a certain level because as soon as that drops off, you're going to wake up. Greg Hanley has a great story about that. And sometimes with Greg's stories, they like fit into the point he's trying to make a little too well, where I'm like, is that a true story?
Yeah. This just works way too well. Yeah.
Yeah. If Greg happens to hear this, I hope he will let us know if this is true or not. But he was telling a story about how he had a sleep dependency on Pop Tarts in like college or something because he like won some Pop Tarts sweepstakes and he had like a lifetime
This is
supply of
Greg's
Pop
story?
Tarts. Yeah, this
Oh
was
my gosh. This is
yeah.
awesome.
I'm probably getting the details of this wrong.
That's
but
all right. That's all right.
yeah, basically, like he had a lifetime supply of Pop Tarts, so he would eat 2 Pop Tarts before he went to bed, and then he would wake up like sometime like 4 or 6 hours later and have to get up and eat more
more
Pop Tarts to be
Pop-Tarts.
able to go back to sleep. Which
That's weird.
is yeah, that's but you see stuff like that in sleep treatment all the time where people have these like weird sleep dependencies that they don't even see where you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what is happening here?
Well, that's it. I'm going to refer to that book chapter again that I was reading because I think this is such a cool point. Like the stimulus control come down to the exteroceptive, like external environment, proprioceptive stuff, right? As well as what they talk about is the interoceptive as well as. So like there's different stimuli there that can totally and we know from behavior analysis like individually impact what's going on. So I don't know. That's crazy.
It's really
like,
cool because
that's
like,
a possibility that you could straight up need Pop-Tarts before you go to bed.
Yeah, like you can have literally anything become an SD for falling asleep.
Yeah.
And because it's such a, I think, powerful biological process, it can be like literally any external stimuli. It can be internal stimuli, like your blood sugar being at a certain level, or like having alcohol in your body. Like I had for a while during my PhD program, you guys might be able to relate to this. It was like you're just going nonstop all day and you're so stressed out. And for me, it was like I would get home and like be doing schoolwork and whatever until really late at night and then need to just quickly shut off and be able to go to sleep so that I could get at least a little bit of sleep to be able to get up and do it again the next day. And for me, I was like, I don't know how to like shut off that quick and transition to sleep, but whiskey sure helps. And so I'd be like, all right, shot of whiskey. Okay, now I can fall asleep. And that was happening for a while where I was like, oh shit, now I'm like, my sleep is dependent on that. And bad news is like alcohol doesn't stay in your body that long. So as soon as my blood alcohol content goes down, guess what? I'm awake again.
Yeah.
And not a good idea to wake up in the middle of the night and do a shot of whiskey, but you know, sometimes you do what you got to do, get through grad school.
Yeah. So when I was in high school, my senior year, I was really into basketball, and the Mom, if you're listening to this, I doubt she is, but I
love you, Mom.
Yeah. So I was able to do two. You had to do 4 out of your 7 classes. I was able to swindle to where I had 2 of those as work credits, where I was working, making cash. They counted for credits. So I had to show up for my first 2 classes. I was in the door at 8. I was out at 9:40 or 5 or something like that, and I was off to like the rest of my day. I'd make sure that I slept super well, and I actually had this thing where I was sick and I got caught in the reinforcement loop of like just some cold medicine and me getting really good sleep to the point that I remember, like, it seemed like the snap of a finger, but I opened the door where I was putting the empty bottles, and there was like 10 Costco size empty bottles in there one night. And I was like, where did all these come from? And I was like, oh, like that's you. Like, you did that.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I need to figure this out.
Yeah.
Like, what? And it was like this crazy loop because I was doing a lot of different things there, and this is just in like hindsight, anecdotal, obviously.
You mean like other drugs or?
No.
Oh.
I was gonna get into that. I was exercising very well as I was like lifting weights for a couple hours a day. Like I was doing a lot of the things. So it was like one of the many things that I was doing, and I was getting this like crazy amount of progress on my basketball game. And it was from sheer amount of time and work in other ways, and it was just like I would also sleep. Yeah, like dude, I would have a swig on game days at like 11 o'clock, and I'd sleep for 4 hours before a game.
It's like a middle school drug dealer in the background taking Robitussin by the bottle.
High school senior. But I was on point that season. Like I was doing good. So yeah, every once in a while, like
nothing like a little liquid ephedrine and Sudafed to get you going in the morning. I'll have over-the-counter cocaine.
I'll have a little, I'll have a little melatonin now and then, and I think about that on and off now and then. Like if I feel like it's like, hey, like you don't need this, like chill out.
Well,
and I
that's
watch
like
it
a
really
thing,
carefully.
right? Like where they say like those aren't habit forming, like ZQL and
Oh, yeah.
all those things. And they're not in the sense that like you're not going to have a chemical dependency on them where you're going to be like,
But
oh, I got to
behaviorally-
take my NyQuil. But yeah, you can have a
Mhm.
behavioral dependency on them. So they, in my
Mhm.
mind, those things are just as dangerous.
Yeah, totally.
Have you found that with like now? Because let's see, how long have you been doing? How many years have you been doing this?
I've been doing sleep work for about 10 years now.
Okay. So I mean, this is perfectly aligns with the emergence of social media, the emergence of smartphones, the emergence of basically screen
I thought you were going to
addiction.
say marijuana for some reason.
I mean, the legalization of marijuana as well. Yeah.
It's happening in Canada, guys, all
hey,
over.
listen, herbal remedies are important. Nature's fine. But anyway, the thing, what I was going to say is, that's we can talk about that too. But we haven't really talked about that on the podcast.
Yeah.
No, we want to work
Podcast.
one day, so let's not talk about that. But I mean, what I was going to say is that have you had to basically adjust the way that you look at these problems and the way that you talk about it as like almost in terms of having to deal with dependency problems to even get to the sleep to begin with? Because I'd say if I were to inject myself into this situation, I would say that number one, I drink, I don't know, 10 K cups a day, 12 maybe. 12, I don't know, a lot.
Really?
I drink a met. I mean,
Wow, that's impressive.
I used to do those levels.
Plus,
man.
I'll take a pre-workout before I work out. So I mean, like,
Dude,
who fucking? I probably have enough caffeine to kill a rhinoceros in my body on a day-to-day basis.
You do, dude.
Wow.
You have enough for caffeineism to start kicking in. Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Well, and
It
the
is.
half-life of caffeine is crazy.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's 4
Yeah,
hours.
so yeah,
Sorry,
that's
we're
something that
getting
you
ahead,
should
yeah.
you should pick up that Matthew Walker book that I referenced before because he has a really awesome chapter on caffeine where he explains kind of the biology of how that works
Oh yeah,
and how it like really 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 messes up your sleep.
Well,
Um,
I'm
yeah.
telling
You're
you,
there.
I listen. I'm a 4-hour guy, maybe 5 on a good day.
So that's like the behavioral effects that you feel of caffeine are different than how long it stays in your brain and whether or not you're actually experiencing like the effects of caffeine and feeling like you feel alert. So you might drink a cup of coffee and be like, yeah, I could go to sleep 2 hours later,
100%.
but it actually still affects your sleep and I can't give you the specific names of all the neurotransmitters and whatever, but
Oh yeah.
caffeine basically blocks certain neurotransmitters that need to basically be like sucked up when you're sleeping for you to get a good night's sleep and to like actually get reap the benefits of sleep. So even if you aren't feeling the effects of caffeine and you can fall asleep, if the caffeine is still in your brain, which it is for like 10 to 12 hours, which is crazy, it actually will mess with your sleep, which is something that I never knew. I always thought like if you can fall asleep, then you're good to go, but not the case.
One last time, what's that book author again?
It's called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker.
Cool.
I might check that out.
I'm literally getting the Audible book right now.
Because
it's really good.
Yeah, when you said you wanted to talk about sleep, I was like, you know what, I kind of need this because I sleep like shit. You know?
It'll make you feel really guilty about a lot of things that you do.
Sure.
But it's
also dark programs.
Those years are gone. I don't judge myself anymore. Like I love myself the way I am. I appreciate the degree of crazy that it causes me. So that's not a thing. But I do think that and I overdo everything, so that's just who I am. But I mean, like, I do appreciate the fact that there is such, like, if you establish any kind of dependency in life, you know, that is to me, and again, free will is illusory, blah, 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 control is illusory, but I mean, still, from a self-discipline perspective, if you do want to take that point of view in terms of, like, exercising, disciplining your life, and wanting to schedule and control certain things so that you can have a nice, clean, operant lifestyle is what I like to think about it. Because I know that Dick Malot's like not everyone's favorite person in the world, but he schedules every minute of his day, which I think has contributed to his productivity in a pretty high capacity in terms of what he's been able to produce in his lifetime. And this has been a very big thesis of his thing. And I think about that in my own life, and it's like, okay, that is an area that I have a horrible sleep hygiene. I think and it's interesting that hearing it referred to as hygiene, I think also helps frame it in a particular way where it's like, you know, you can stink. Like, gross.
That's something I tell my, I teach in Regis College's online grad program for behavior analysis. And that's one thing that I really harp on my students about is like, if there is one thing that you have to make time for, it is getting an adequate amount of sleep, which means 7 to 9 hours for everyone. Like that's a huge thing that I really liked in that book is they had a lot of really good evidence for why 7 to 9 hours is what every adult needs, no matter what you think. Because there's so many people that will argue like, well, I only get 7 to 9 hours. Yeah. And that's like,
you guys always rag on me for not being an early mourner, but like I'm a 10 hour. I'm like, I want to sleep 10 hours.
Us by like 20 years.
I mean, I'll be honestly, if I make it to my 60s, it will definitely be a good life.
These guys text me at like 6 a.m. I'm like, oh my God, go away.
I already know that's my fate, so I'm trying to maximize my hours now.
Part of the reason I'm nervous to read this Why We Sleep is because I did like between 2 and 4 hours during grad school, like almost consistently. And it was once a week, sometimes every 2 weeks, where I'd just like fall over like for 10 hours. And I, in the moment, and I still don't regret it, but I know I was shaving off and like losing that elsewhere somewhere in my life. Even if it wasn't hours, it was like increasing the chances and risks of other things. And it makes me nervous there.
Done.
If you,
but at the expense of what, which is a really good point there.
I think that book will make you. It'll sort of scare you into wanting to sleep more.
I've been doing better last number of years. It's like slowly. I don't know if it's aged or just like I don't have as much things to do or more efficient, but I don't know. It's now about a 6.5 hour sort of thing.
I'm a stickler for. Like I'm definitely more towards the 9 hour of sleep a night, and that's kind of my happy place. And my like if I'm getting 8, I'm fine. If I'm getting 7, you don't really want to deal with me. My boyfriend can vouch for that, and he's somebody that only really needs about 7, and he's good to go, and he's pretty energetic. So we're on like 2 different kind of sleep planes, and that is like a constant headbutt thing because you both kind of gotta do your own thing with sleep stuff.
So do you drink so you should not drink coffee how many hours before you go to sleep?
That guy in that book recommends about 10 to 12 hours because it can stay in your brain that long, which is crazy. So I try really hard to not drink caffeine after 2. I'm not always successful with that, but I go to sleep around midnight, so I try to cut it off by 2.
It's 7:30.
Yeah, and you're drinking coffee.
I
Man.
finished mine, and but it's 4 o'clock. I got the 3 hour time difference on
It's
the
5 o'clock.
It was 4 when I finised, I think.
Oh,
Ish.
okay.
That's hilarious. I'm like, oh, so like we're sitting here talking. I'm like, no, don't want that on the camera. Like, but I
Yeah,
do want it
it's
so bad.
it's crazy because when I read that and I always was under the impression that like if it's like 4 hours before bed it's fine, and this was last summer that I was reading this book, and I was working in London and I was working sometimes like 12-hour shifts on a trapeze rig. So in the middle of my shifts I'd go and like grab a coffee and down coffee at like 5 o'clock, and I'd be in bed by like 11 and I wasn't sleeping well and I couldn't figure out why. Like, why am I waking up or why am I not feeling rested? And I read that and I was like, oh, I'm going to try and stop doing that and see what happens. And I started being really strict about not having any caffeine after 2. And it made such a huge difference in my sleep that I was like, oh, shit, that was the thing that was messing me up. Because other than that, like, I tend to be a really good sleeper because I kind of know what I need to do and it's
Yeah.
important to me.
Yeah, but the
Dimitri,
physical withdrawal from caffeine is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god, the headaches are so horrible. Like
Yeah.
I'll
in
for
24
like,
hours. It goes by
dude,
quick.
really? Is it that fast? Oh man, if I forget to drink coffee in the morning or like I'm just putzing around and like by 10, I am. I mean, it's literally feels like a electrical pulse going from ear to ear. It's like I need my shit.
You
Yeah.
have to
need it.
wean yourself off.
Yeah.
That's
You need like a slow fade.
You gotta do like a
Wow.
methadone withdrawal.
Methadone caffeine withdrawal. I know. I basically keep that generic K cup company in myself. I cause more whales to die probably just because of the garbage that gets produced in most people. But whatever. It's like one thing I'm willing to sacrifice for
Yeah.
myself.
I'm not gonna lie, I really like my caffeinated tea before bed.
Yeah, that's wow.
That's my one sleep habit that I can't, or not that I can't, but I don't want to.
Yeah. Well, even I mean, that's a one that you could switch out for like a decaf tea, right? And not make it too terrible. Blech.
Blech.
Yeah, that was a big thing in London with a lot of my friends. It's like having tea is such a funny thing that you think is just like a stereotypical British thing, but they really
Oh,
do.
they drink a lot of
like
tea.
a lot of tea. That's
Yeah.
like a social thing. But
So Dimitri brought this up earlier, talking about military and some of the training they've done around that. Is there? I have a story on that I want to get to in just a second with myself, but are there general like sleep hygiene things like that you train and kind of like cover all that we could offer some people of like consider these sort of things?
yeah, so I always tell people when I'm
Caffeine?
doing sleep treatment, yeah, stop drinking caffeine. um, try basically my goal for people that would indicate to me that they are a good sleeper and that they have good sleep hygiene is that they fall asleep within 10 to 15 minutes of laying down in their bed, and they stay asleep for 7 to 9 hours if they're an adult, more if they're a child, and there's all those sleep charts that you can look up like by age. And that if they do wake up in the middle of the night, they can reinitiate sleep really quickly. So if something happens to wake you up, but you shouldn't be actually waking up in the middle of the night, like that you really remember. It's interesting because there's actually, if you look at hypnograms, which show like sleep cycles throughout the night, you actually do have like 3 or 4 awakenings during the night, and that's part of your normal sleep cycles. That like as you're coming out of a certain phase of sleep, you'll actually have this brief awakening.
Yeah.
If you're a good sleeper, you shouldn't remember those, and they shouldn't last more than like a couple seconds, and that's just like maybe you roll over and reposition and then you fall right back to sleep. So that for me is what indicates a good sleeper for an adult. And there's a lot of ways that you can get there, but the important things are looking at what are your sleep dependencies. So that's kind of a fancy way of saying what are the SDs that occasion sleep.
Yeah.
And that's usually the biggest one, and then looking at the MOs for sleep. So how can we make sure that when you are getting into bed, sleep is going to be a powerful reinforcer, so you are motivated to fall asleep, so that when you get in your bed you fall asleep quickly and you stay asleep. And the hands down biggest, most important, best thing that you can do is sleep on a consistent schedule. So go to bed at the same time every night, wake up at the same time every morning. that means weekends too. So if you
Yeah.
are somebody that has to get up early for work, you got to get up at the same time on the weekend, or you are just shooting yourself in the foot every
That was
single
one of my
weekend.
secrets to productivity for years was
Yeah.
like I got caught and kind of captured in that reinforcement cycle of realizing that. And I used to get up at 4:30 and I just kept getting up at 4:30 on the weekends. And
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
that's a huge one. That makes a
yeah,
huge difference for sleep. And certain people have there's like a biological kind of predisposition to either be a morning person or a night person and to tend to
yeah,
be more alert at one of those times. And that's something that they've actually studied. And if you put somebody in a sleep lab where they don't have any reference to what time it is, and you just kind of see what sleep pattern they get on, certain people will tend towards more like pushing it later and later. Certain people will tend towards being awake earlier and just kind of being on an earlier schedule. So I
yeah.
think knowing where you fall there and trying to, if you can, tailor your schedule to that. Like I know
Mm-hmm.
I'm a night person. I am like, you don't want to be around me for like the first hour after I wake up. I'm not productive. I can't do anything. My body doesn't work. I'm just like, ugh.
Yeah,
And that's a big reason why I moved away from having a regular like 9 to 5 desk job, because
yeah,
that kind of schedule was just messing me up.
yeah.
And I need to be on a little bit of a later schedule. I tend to be a little more productive at night. So
I'm
kind
the
of,
opposite. I'm not a night owl. I'm one of those larks. You know,
yeah,
early in the
yeah.
morning. Yeah.
Yeah, and figuring out what works for you and kind of adapting your schedule to that makes a big difference. Like if you're somebody that's a night owl and you're constantly shifting your sleep schedule to where it doesn't want to be, you're always going
Mm-hmm.
to have that little bit of uh not quite being able to get on track. But
Yeah.
trying to keep a consistent schedule is single-handedly the best thing that any
Cool.
adult or child can do. um, Limiting screen time at night. And I think everybody always hears about that and blue light and how that affects sleep. And that's a really important thing to understand, is that that actually like biologically affects sleep, because we're getting so much artificial light coming into our eyes. It screws up your body's hormone production, specifically melatonin. Your body produces melatonin based on a day night cycle
Yeah.
based on light. So if you are constantly bombarding yourself with artificial light, it kind of throws your body off and it doesn't want to produce that melatonin, which helps make you sleepy and helps regulate your sleep cycle. So at um, I have mixed feelings on that. Greg's group did a little bit of research on that, and initially had some pretty positive results with using melatonin with kids. Um, and I've seen a lot of different studies and research, some good, some bad. I think we don't really know enough about it yet to know if it's a great thing to use long term. It can be super helpful in helping get you on a schedule if you have something like jet lag happening, or
Mm-hmm.
if you maybe got off track on a vacation, like summer vacation, and your
Yeah.
schedule has shifted way over here and now you got to get it back. I think for temporary problems like that, it can be really helpful. My personal experiences with it haven't been good. When I've tried it for jet lag before, and I seem to have weird side effects of like
Really?
migraines and stuff from it,
Huh.
and I don't know why, but
The last couple of
yeah.
years when I was traveling a lot, hopping around in time zones quite a bit, I used that um, with a lot of success there. Part of what I read at the time, and this was reading a few different things, I think on the acceptance and commitment therapy listserv. I remember finding an article there where they were saying that it was roughly around zero point 0.5 milligrams, I want to say, was what people were supplementing with. And I think most pills on the market were 3 or 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
one of the
they're like
big
way
issues they
more
were
than you
talking
need.
about at the time was just like most over the counter stuff is just way too much. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and so that's one thing that I like really watched there was just kind of playing with that myself and figuring out like what would kind of work there. But hopping time zones, like I could do, I could switch time zones so well. It's when you start pushing like 8 or 12 hour time zones, like those were a little bit harder for me, but it would still help so much
Yeah.
on me just like getting on that time zone very quickly. But yeah,
Yeah.
I've had I've had some friends that are just like, yeah, it just doesn't work. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's not something that I ever recommend to people
Okay.
as part of a regular sleep treatment because I'd
Yeah,
rather they try behavioral things first, and usually
for
we can
sure.
get it under control with that. But in really severe cases, or a lot of kids with autism are already on it, and I say like, you know what, if you're already doing it and that's what your doctors told you to do, it's fine. I'm not going to mess with that. The other thing with kids with autism, a lot of them that are on behavioral medications or seizure medications, those can play a huge role in sleep problems, especially the meds that only last like 4 to 6 hours. So if they're getting those meds before bed, then we're consistently seeing a wake up in the middle of the night at like 4 to 6 hours, and it's because that med is not at the same level in your system. And it's the same thing where that's like, it's like low blood sugar or alcohol in your
Yeah.
system, where your body learns how to go to sleep in this one state, and then when you're not in that state anymore and you have one of those normal nighttime wakings that's part of your sleep cycle, then your body's like, oh shit, can't do it, can't go back to
Yeah,
sleep
that
because things
stimulus
aren't the
control is
same.
insane on like
Yeah,
Wow.
how
yeah,
important it is.
yep.
I'm having an
And that's
existential crisis as you're talking this entire time. Just to be clear, for
that's
the listeners out
the big
there.
thing with when you're going to sleep, making sure that everything in your environment is going to stay consistent for that full 7 to 9 hours is really important. So looking at things like don't fall asleep with a TV on and then have the TV go on sleep mode so that it shuts off, because then when you
Mm,
have those normal awakenings during the night, it's going to be a lot harder to reinitiate sleep.
yeah,
So you want to make sure that your environment is consistent for the whole 7 to 9 hours. So the like light stays the same, temperature stays relatively the same, noise stays the same. If you're falling asleep like with your phone in your hand scrolling Facebook, you're probably going to wake up at some point in the night and not be able to reinitiate sleep until you've got your phone back in your hand. I see that
yeah.
one so often in kids and adults, like people literally falling asleep scrolling Facebook and like phone on their face, and then they wake up in the middle of the night and scroll Facebook again until they fall asleep,
That's
and
crazy. I don't
that's
have to
not good.
re-scroll, but I do sometimes fall asleep with my hand. Um, I don't. This is where like I don't have the data to know whether or not I'm sleeping well enough to be surviving well, but I feel refreshed and I feel all right. But like
Yeah,
I got to be careful in there. If I'm not, I almost like limit it to where it's just kind of like read a little bit, but like I don't hop on Twitter. I'm not gonna read on like what's trending. Like I'm just gonna like kind of casually enjoy 5, 10, 15 minutes and then like set it aside, right?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
that's
try to
crazy.
not have my phone in bed at night at all. So like I
That's
turn my
good
phone off,
practice. Yeah.
put it away before I'm even in bed.
Yeah.
One, because of the blue light issue, but two, because why would you engage in behavior of laying still and going to sleep when you have the most powerful reinforcer in the whole world like in
Right.
your hand? Like there's so much competing behavior with that where it's
Exactly,
Yep.
like,
though.
Yep. That's
yeah,
right.
it's
That's
like
Yeah.
a,
why, though.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you do because it's.
it's the
So
most
I mean, if you're an
reinforcing thing ever.
information junkie, like novel stimuli is my addiction. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's it. You're just like, I want to read, I want to learn, I want to like
a
consume something.
continuous, ongoing influx of novel stimuli, auditory or visual, or I mean, like it's compulsive is a weak word for the experience that like, and I don't mean that, and I know that like we've been exaggerating this whole time, but like it is,
Yeah.
I'm physically compelled to the point of distress if I'm not engaging in the behavior to
Yeah.
Yeah.
be able to have that going on, to be able to function in any capacity with stillness.
Yeah.
So that's the only way I can only fall asleep with noise. Like it is, I need noise.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's a way to sort of, it's almost a way of meditating in and of itself, right? It's a way of distracting yourself from your
Absolutely.
own
Oh yeah.
whatever's going on
Just
in your
Yeah,
pure
mind.
chaos.
escapism from the world of 2020.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like if
Um,
you are going to fall asleep with a TV on or a podcast on or whatever, you're better off leaving it on for the whole night than having it
Yeah.
shut off
yeah.
at some point.
I have to say this, having a child, like my sleep schedule was fucked up beforehand. Now it's like I'm living in upside down land a lot of the time. Like, and
Yeah.
he's a year old, so we really need to have we've been having a hard talk about getting to the point where it's time for him to get his own room and sleep train him a little bit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, definitely.
I have to say that having a child has, I mean, because it especially if you have a fucked up sleep schedule like I have. I've in my entire life I've been a bad sleeper, and this is now is even gotten worse, and I've gotten even more addicted
Mhm.
to the need for distraction and the need for sound to be able to do it, just because I mean, I feel like I need to be alert if I do wake up in the middle of the night. Otherwise,
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
stumble with a child in my hands, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
they can't do that.
Yeah.
You have to be
Yeah.
present. There's no
Yeah.
My sister had her first kid, and she called me like 2 weeks ago, and she was like, "What do you know about sleep?" And sleep schedules and like things like this. And I was like, "Actually, I don't know much, but it turns out we're actually having a podcast on this sort of stuff soon. So like, I'm gonna know more, but
Tell her to
if
call
anything,
me.
yeah, I was like, I'll know the boundaries of like where you need, like when you start calling somebody."
Yeah.
So what do you think about sleep training? I'm gonna get selfish here, and we're gonna talk about me for a minute. So what do you think about the whole meet the parents Ferberizing situation versus like I don't know,
Yeah.
whatever
I
systematic way that a behavior analyst will do it that's gentle.
Yeah, I hate the word sleep training, and I try to be careful to not use it because it has such a negative connotation
Hmm.
with a lot of parents. And you probably know this as a new parent. There's all these different like parenting groups and
Yeah, I
terms
don't.
and things and like people promoting different things and there's a real pushback right now against sleep training because people view it as this like really horrible process and they associate it with
Yeah,
fervor
yeah,
and
yeah.
the cry it out stuff. I always tell people like right away when I'm taking on a new sleep case, I don't do sleep training. I don't do cry it out. This is not going to be a miserable process for you or your child. Like it
Yeah.
should actually be a pretty pleasant process for everybody. It's going to involve some work. It's going to involve changing some things. It's going to involve probably 2 weeks of kind of weirdness while you get used to these new routines that
Hmm.
we're doing. But it shouldn't ever be a like awful experience of like your kids locked in a room crying.
I'm
Are you
so
laughing?
dissatisfied with. I'm so dissatisfied with that answer. I was literally hoping you were gonna say, yeah, put him in his own room. He'll
I
cry for
mean,
45
it
minutes, and
works.
it's fine. It's called
Yeah,
It'll work.
extinction.
It's just
He'll
not
it
fun.
works.
survive.
It
Yeah.
works, but there are so few parents that can actually like do it and do it
Yeah.
right that I
Trying to
don't
get my wife
ever.
to listen to this podcast, Gary. You're not helping
I
me.
mean, I think as a behavior analyst, you are probably much more likely to be able to do it successfully. But I would bet that if I told you to put your 1-year-old in their own room and shut the door and let them cry, you wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to do it.
It's not gonna happen. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
not gonna. We're
yeah,
not gonna.
And that was part of the conversation I was like loosely stepping around and having with my sister was just like, she's like, she's in the world where she's like consuming all this different perspectives. And it was also like, I know these behavioral processes, I don't have the expertise in this. Like I'm not helping in it, to be clear.
Mhm.
But I was also like, I don't think that's the first place I'd go because of just the probability of it going exponentially worse or like just not
Yeah.
getting better, right? Is
Yeah.
very high is what I meant there.
There's just so
Yeah.
much junk shit out there, though, especially when it comes to like it. And honestly, being somebody who works with children, and I mean, we specialize in this stuff. This is our work, So whether or not it's with our own children or not, yes, it's impossible to be completely impartial and all that other stuff with your own kid. But I mean, generally speaking, you don't lose the understanding of facts, as they relate to a particular topic area.
Yeah.
And there's so much predatory trash and also so much pressure to do so
That's
much
a great
holistic.
way to call that, by the way. Predatory
It is.
trash.
It's
Yeah.
predatory trash because it feeds on people's desire to love the person that you love more than yourself,
Yeah.
and it takes advantage of that desire to take care of them and make sure that they're
Yeah.
living a happy, good life, and you're
Well,
setting them up for
there's
the
so
right
much
way.
um like cognitive psych stuff out there with like all the attachment parenting and things like that, like that
Yeah.
if you don't do all these things and you don't do it right, you're gonna mess your kid up for the rest of their life. And like that's the thing with the extinction and cry it out kind of stuff. Like if you leave your baby in bed and they cry themselves to sleep, it's gonna have effects on them for the rest of their life. And like
We know that's not
it's
true.
not. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not true. It is probably going to fix the sleep problem, but it's going to be super unpleasant for everybody and
Yeah.
you're probably going to screw it up and make the problem worse. So let's just not do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's a good point, actually. It's an excellent
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a thing because the communities too. Actually, there's a lot of people have kids and they lose their mind. Like like new parents in particular because like they're and now though I understand a lot more the families that I work with kids with autism and how they get because you feel empathy and compassion for our families in the field because I mean they're suffering a very serious situation that's unique and has so many deleterious effects on one's life that it's just no one can really understand unless they're in that situation and they're experiencing it. And it's a totally alternate universe that no one anticipates. So I mean, but if it happens, you it sucks you into wanting to do and try stuff just no matter what, just to see if it'll work and it'll help and do all
Yeah,
that
and
things.
especially quick fixes or things that don't require a lot of response effort on your part. Like it's easier to give someone a pill that's going to fix something than to be like, "Oh, I got to go through 2 weeks of changing my own behavior." And so it's easy to fall into those traps of like, yeah, this sounds easy and good and it's going to work fast, and of
And the
course those are the
judgment from
things
other
that never
parents
work.
too, which is
Yeah.
weird because then it
I don't
becomes
know.
this like bizarro like
Yeah.
cult, like you gave your
Yeah.
kid unorganic apples, you monster.
I don't know if any of you have ever been in any of the like parents of kids with autism Facebook groups. I've somehow gotten myself into a couple of those, even though I obviously am not a parent of a kid with autism. I They don't apparently vet people very well in all those. So I am in a couple of those, and it's like super interesting to read some of the stuff that goes on in there, and there's a lot of really bad talk about ABA right now in a lot of those groups of like ABA being abusive, and uh people kind of really pushing back against that right now.
Oh, that's
It's
I'm
super
in a
interesting.
lot of those. I'm in some of those groups as well. A couple of big ones like 10,000, 11,000 members, and
I don't know if you
yeah.
guys can hear the I have a pet bunny, and his cage is underneath my table, and he is pissed off about something, and he's stomping his feet really loud right now. So
That's all right.
apologies if you can hear that in the
No, you're
No
background.
cool.
worries.
Pet bunny. I had a pet chinchilla in college.
That's
Well,
awesome.
I like weird
I
animals.
got this bunny by accident, but I have clicker trained him, and he does a lot of really cool things, and it's been super fun.
I used to get it to see, he would perch on my shoulder and eat craisins while I do my homework. Chinchilla. I
So
love that thing.
for the groups that you brought up, is it extending into like the sleep work that you do as well, or is it
Yeah,
just
so I got in those groups because I figured it would be a good way to find families that need help with sleep
yeah
things, because there are it's parents posting at least 3 or 4 times a day. I see posts about kids having these really severe sleep problems, and I'll read through all the comments from other parents of the things they're suggesting, and I'm just like, "Oh, no,
yeah
don't do any of those things." And sometimes I'll comment on them and be like, "Hey, I'm a doctor that does sleep work, and if you want to talk, I do free 15-minute consultations that I can
yeah
give you some tips, or you can find out if this is something you need to get treated by a medical doctor or by somebody that does the kind of work that I do." And I almost never get a response from those, or I get a response and they're like, "Well, what does it involve?" And when I kind of talk them through the process, they're like, "Yeah, no, I'll try this pill first," or like, "I'll go do this other thing first." And I'm like,
yeah
okay, but there's a
yeah I
lot of
think
pushback there with people not wanting sleep treatment, because we
yeah
think that it just means cry it out.
yeah I think that that whole topic of those groups and um, that movement, we could do a whole justice on different
Oh
podcasts
yeah,
and bunch of class and like that's a giant topic. But the what was I gonna say? Oh, I good ethical work will take some time, but like that's gonna speak for itself when you have good outcomes, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, it's not the only thing, but like that's one of the most core parts. And then that word of mouth, the marketing, like it starts to come around.
Yeah,
There's so many people that are looking for the solution. I just think sometimes, unfortunately, it takes like looking for those quick tricks and realizing they don't work to also alter the motivation. Like, okay, let's actually try to work with somebody that has spent a ton of time in this area and says that they have a different approach, you know? So I don't know, I'm rooting for you, I guess, on that side. You know what I mean? Like, I
yeah,
just think it's a slow process. And
yeah,
Facebook, any social media accounts like that it's also so far removed from like a good natural conversation in the right context that
mhm.
it's probably really hard. Um,
Yeah, it's definitely, I think for me right now as a consultant, it's difficult for me to find actual clinical cases, like directly marketing to parents, because they don't really understand what it is that I do or why that would be beneficial. And it's also, I don't take insurance right now because that is such a nightmare to deal with. So it's
yeah,
all private pay. But the cool thing with sleep is it's a really short process in most cases. Like the assessment can be done in an hour. They can take baseline data, and then the treatment, like it takes me an hour to write up a treatment plan, it takes me a couple hours to train the parents, and then I kind of give them whatever support they need. I do it all through telehealth, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of just like check-ins, and like once you teach them how to do it, it's up to them to do it or to not do it, and you support them however you can. It's not, it bugs me a little bit that it's not as behavior analytic as I want it to be, where like
Yeah.
I can't be the one doing it, I can't be the one taking data, I can't be there all night long.
Yeah.
And so it's not quite as clean of a science as I would like, but it's super effective, and it's effective in a really short amount of time if you
Social
can
change, like you're making a difference, and that's the
yeah,
important part. That's super cool. Yeah.
yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah, being on lockdown, that's affected a lot of people's lives and a lot of business and that kind of thing. I mean,
yeah,
because
for
when
sure.
did you start doing the consulting business on your? I mean, obviously you were taking cases on the side a little bit, but
Yeah,
I
I
mean, really
started.
doing it.
Yeah, I started really pursuing starting my own business doing it this fall, and I kind of started ramping up more work around January, and from January to March, things were rolling along really
Yeah.
nicely,
Yeah.
and then COVID hit, and it's
Yeah.
all come to a screeching halt. But most of the work I get actually is with other behavior analysts, so I consult to other companies and I do trainings for them, or I consult to BCBAs that have a sleep case that they want help with, and
Yeah.
that's like a super quick, short process. If I'm consulting to a BCBA on a
Yeah.
particular case, it's like an hour to 2 hours
Yeah.
tops. I do a lot of webinars and trainings and things like that, so I can try to hopefully disseminate what I'm doing
Yeah.
to more people.
Yeah. Hopefully some people are listening to this and reach out. Of course, the contact information we'll make sure is there. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, that's really cool. I wanted to shift back, if I can, into the army thing that we were talking about. It's
Oh
like the
Oh
yeah.
sleep
yeah,
hygiene
sorry
stuff.
man, I interrupted you and totally derailed. My
No
bad.
worries. No worries. Is that all right with everyone if I do that?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
That sounds good. Do it.
So when I went to grad, there's a little bit of backstory here. When I went down to grad school in Florida Tech, part of what enticed me there was there's a lot of different opportunities. One of the crazy ideas that my professor had was he was like, I want to figure out how to operantly control sleep cycles. Because the assumption there was that there was some research that might have suggested at the time, I can't remember where I could quote this and things like that, hold this very lightly, everybody out there, that sleep was an inefficient process. And so the idea there was like, could we start to operantly control this? Because if we could, you might be able to do something where you're actually able to induce it and improve the quality of sleep and things like that. And so the first thing that I did, like first day, was we had me and another grad student volunteered to wear a Zeo that sampled every 5 seconds your brainwaves, I assume. I mean, I would strap this around my head, go to bed. And those data we'd take and we'd look at. And for the most part, there's so many interests, so many things going on. We got totally derailed from this. But I was like, we're still in baseline was my idea. And I was like, I'm not going to stop. I wore that thing almost every night unless I was out of town for 2 years straight. I've got the data saved on a hard drive somewhere. And the only thing that I was really interested in that time was like, how do I be as efficient with my schedule? Because you're talking about grad school programs or master's programs, right? And I was just like, there's not enough time in the day. I need to be able to be as efficient as I can, whether that's like reading while I'm pouring my cup of coffee or, like whatever I can possibly do. I used to have my friend read me like SAFMED cards when we were stuck in traffic jams. So I was like, hey, read these to me. Like when we were driving back from work, like it was everything I could possibly do. And so one of those things was just like, I was sick of sitting and spending the 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes roughly, depending on the night, of like having to fall asleep. I was like, this is 30 minutes I could be studying. Like, what am I doing? And so I started this thing where I was just realizing that like I just noticed over a few nights of like paying attention of I had some like tense muscles and like I was sitting in weird ways. And then also my breathing patterns weren't, it was breathing patterns. And then also like I was thinking about things all the time. And so it was one of those things where I spent about a month and I got it down to where I could fall asleep within like 2 minutes, minute or two. Like it was super fast from the time I went. Now I was tired. I was so tired. So like this was not enough data there to like, if I was sleeping adequately, would this still work whatsoever? And I'm sure it would change a bit. But it was interesting because it was like 4, 5, 6, 7 years later when somebody sent me an article about the army stuff that they were doing, and essentially it was a lot of the same things. It was like, are you tacting your bodily states, and like, are you strength? Like, are you clenching your jaw? Are you holding certain muscles tense and things like that? Part of it was the breathing. Like, are you trying to just like slowly breathe through your nose, in, out, in, out? And then of course, the whole air quotes mind racing around thing was another part of it, which for me, I've luckily never really struggled with those sort of things. I know the original army one was like saying, don't think, don't think, don't think. They're trying to get people to not think about things. But I stumbled across that, and I don't know if it's useful for others, but like that process seemed to work so well for me. And I still to this day, like if I'm having trouble sleeping, it's like go through your body, like are my clenching certain muscles, look at my breathing patterns real quick. Am I thinking about things that are kind of getting me off the rails? Is there a way I can start to like, do some lucis actus sort of stuff, right? On like calm those things down. And then it seems to be really quickly. So like I don't struggle with falling asleep ever since I kind of stumbled into that. I just don't know how much that's like science versus lucky reinforcement traps that I think are real that really aren't. You know what I mean? Does that make
I
sense?
feel like that's a thing. It's sort of like biofeedback, right? But without all the fancy equipment. Like if you
Yeah.
can pay attention to your body,
Mm-hmm.
and figure out the things that are interfering with you being able to reach that sort of state of behavioral quietude. So
Yeah.
that's kind of paying attention to biological things that are happening that are interfering behavior.
Yeah.
I think
When I was
that's
traveling
what
quite a
it
bit
is.
with Megan Miller over the place, she would always be like, "How do you fall asleep anywhere?" And I was like, "I feel like I taught myself like how to kind of calm down and chill out." Now, like when you're not sleeping 7 to 9 hours like I do, like I feel like there's an increased MO there all the time, and I can't
Yeah.
ignore that. But
Yeah.
um, it was something that was just so interesting that I kind of stumbled across, and in hindsight, I was like, "Huh, I seem to be doing some of the things right." And at the time, I was just really interested in talking stimulus control and trying to figure out what was going on in my own life.
Yeah.
I
Well,
wish
it's
we had,
it's definitely a little bit of that, right? It's controlling some of the SDs
yeah,
that
yeah. So like when I was reading the chapter this morning, kind of refreshing, it was like, I was like, huh, like it seems that I was just kind of accidentally stacking the deck in some ways. Um, but it got me onto this whole area of looking into quantified self and other people that were measuring weird bio things as well and trying to learn from things.
Mhm.
And I've got that data. We never did anything with it, but I've got 2 years of baseline data
That's
essentially.
really cool.
And
I feel like all that like biofeedback stuff is super cool because it's
yeah,
like actually using biology to change behavior, or using
yeah,
behavior to change biology, I guess.
yeah. It was really fun, like self experiment on looking at how many cycles I was getting and things like that throughout the night when I was waking
That's
up,
really
how
cool.
much. Yeah.
It's cool how easy it is to measure sleep now. Like there's so many like with all the smart watches and different smartphone apps. They're not all of course going to be as accurate as if you were like in a sleep lab, but
Or as they
it's
market.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean it's a good way that if you are trying to change your sleep to just start getting some of that data, and even if it's just like tracking when you go to bed and when you wake up, and that can be super helpful. My phone does it automatically. I have a Samsung that like I noticed randomly one day like, "Oh, my phone's tracking my sleep automatically." Like it records when I put my phone down for the night, and it assumes that I'm asleep like 10 minutes later, and it records when I pick my
Huh.
phone up and keeps track of that,
Yeah.
which is cool.
Yeah. I know some
Just
people
talking
are.
about sleep, my eyes are getting heavy.
More coffee.
It's never enough.
Yeah, it's probably not doing much for you at this point,
One
other than
other,
wrecking sleep.
there's one other area I want to ask you about. So again, disclaimer to people listening. This is something I don't believe is actually science, but I want to ask you and start to like personally get a little bit of information out of this. This is my selfish part of it. So there's this weird little like niche myth on areas of YouTube culture where people talk about like you don't need to sleep as much as you need to. What you can do is supplement some of that with exercise.
Yeah, that's not
And
true.
yeah, but like what role does exercise play? And like clearly, like I've read that, having some sort of routine, somewhat of a regular exercise routine can help. So like, can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I know there's some information about that in that Why We Sleep book.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak to the biology of that, but I know there is
Yeah.
some pretty good data showing that if you do get a certain amount of exercise where your heart rate is within a certain
Okay.
area, then that actually does help sleep later.
And is that
I
something
don't
that
know.
you do yourself, if you don't mind me asking, or is there
I
things that
mean,
you're kind of
I'm a
watching there? Or?
yeah, I myself am a pretty active person, and I know I definitely sleep better, obviously, when I'm more active. But that's definitely something that I recommend when I'm doing sleep treatment with people, that
Yeah,
they try to get some exercise and some cardio time
yeah,
in during the day. But be careful that you don't do it too close to when you go to sleep. I usually say like 4 hours is ideal. 4 hours before you go to sleep. I know for a lot of people that's not possible if you're working late and your only time you can do it is
yeah.
later in the day, but you kind of don't want to get yourself too stimulated.
Aroused. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
cool. Yeah, it I don't know. It's one of those things where like I clearly need personally like 6 7 hours to feel like really great, but um, I feel I get this noticeable change in the
hmm
quality and of sleep and like how I feel as a result of regular exercise. And for me, it's so interesting how like sleep is that area where what we call it a biobehavioral state.
hmm
It really is like such a great example of just an intersection of like respondent, operant, biology, chemistry, neurology, behavioral.
yeah,
Like it's the intersection of all these sort of things.
yeah,
Fascinates me.
yeah. And it's interesting to me too that it is such a complicated thing, but there are some really simple behavioral strategies
Yeah.
that can make such a big difference in it, and like little things like that, like even if you're just getting some exercise every day, that can have a big influence on your sleep, and that's a relatively simple change to make.
Cool. This is such a fascinating area. Is there anything
Yeah,
I
that we
literally, I literally want to go now. Just lay down and try to actually be quiet for a minute.
Oh,
man,
Quiet
Dimitri.
people.
get the Headspace app if you
Dude,
don't.
I don't know if we've gotten into mindfulness on the. Have we talked about
we
mindfulness on the
haven't yet,
podcast?
but that's also a giant topic we can get into. Before we get into that, hold on.
Long story short, I'm one of the 1% of people that has a very reactive response to mindfulness.
I have a response of if I try to do any of those meditation things that are longer than like 3 minutes, I fall asleep, which is,
Oh
I
wow,
guess, a
That's
good
nice.
thing.
God,
Yeah,
that's an
if I turn my
embarrassment of
brain off, I'm
riches.
out.
That's
It's great to be unemployed. I can sleep as much as I want. Like
You're
10 hours a
self-employed. You're
day.
not unemployed. You're self-employed.
Well,
What
I'm
great
a little bit of both.
advertisement. I'm so good I can fall asleep so much all the time.
Yeah.
I was gonna say for this podcast, we could just like everybody close their eyes and see who falls asleep first, and I mean it'd be a
Uh-huh.
really boring podcast.
Well, we know
But
Dimitri would lose.
Yeah, yeah, and we
I don't
make
know. Right now, right now I'm like feeling kind of like, okay.
there's
Yeah.
another
Find your
cool
happy
thing
place.
that
And then
I
we're gonna.
learned.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, there's Greg taught me this, that everybody knows the like mid afternoon dip in alertness, right? Like everyone's heard of that. 5 Hour Energy used to have those commercials about like your after lunch like being
Crash.
really sleepy. Yeah, so there's like a pretty regular pattern of alertness that humans go through during the day, where it's like you wake up and you gradually become more alert and you kind of hit this peak, and then mid afternoon you hit this drop, and that's like your lowest level of alertness for the day. And then after that it gradually climbs for the rest of the day until an hour to 2 hours before bed. That's actually your peak alertness for the day for
Really?
pretty much everybody. And Greg used to refer to that as the forbidden zone, meaning like don't try to go to bed during that time because you are not going to fall asleep, because that's when your body is at its most alert.
Yeah.
uh, so it's like there's some really interesting things with like patterns of alertness, and it shifts depending on like when your sleep cycle is. So like
Yeah.
for me, it's not like a noon dip in alertness. It's like a 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock dip in alertness because I'm
Okay.
on a bit of a later schedule. But it's super interesting. Pay attention to that, because you'll if you start paying attention, you'll notice like an hour to 2 hours before your normal bedtime is when your brain's like good to go. Even if you're not a night person, that's like kind of when your body is at its most alert. And if you were to try to go to bed during that time, it's not happening. You're not going to fall asleep.
Pat Fryman talked about that because he was talking about how, like, if you know you have to get up super early the next morning, a lot of people will try to go to sleep a
Yeah.
couple hours before
Yeah.
so that they still get their full time. And he was
Yep.
like, yeah, don't do that. You'll actually
Don't
have a
do
worse
that.
sleep and it'll be
Doesn't
way
matter.
worse.
Yeah. Pat Fryman's
Yep.
my hero.
You gotta
in all
same.
the ways. I love him. He's so great.
You gotta shift those schedules much sooner or
Yeah.
before, right?
Yeah.
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 I
Yeah.
used
Or
to.
just keep it what it normally is, and you have one night of shorter sleep, and kind of sucks, but it's not going to kill you.
Yeah, yeah. That was my jet lag theory. Was uh, originally it was like, can I get on the same time zone early and just get prepared for it? And then it turned out it was so busy. It was just, I'm gonna fly there. I'm gonna stay up as long and as much as it hurts. I'm just gonna push through, have some
Yeah.
melatonin, and fall over. If that
Yep.
means 30, 36 hours, something crazy, we'll do it.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I'm a
the
really good airplane sleeper, so if I'm going forward in time zones going east, then I'll sleep a lot on the plane. I don't know. I always figure it out in my head of
yeah,
like,
yeah,
should
yeah.
I sleep on the plane or should I stay awake on the plane and
Yep,
be tired when I get there?
yep. I've
One
done
of
the
my
same
favorite
thing.
things about talking about this topic is that it kind of puts, I don't know, it kind of frames what we do. There's an art to it, you know. I
Mhm.
think we talk about and dwell on the notion of behavior analysis being such a strict science and a natural science, but really in its execution, when we start getting into some of these more abstract, a little less direct contingency related behaviors and just biobehavioral realities that we have to contend with in order to be functioning living organisms, uh, it does kind of, it brings in this ebb and flow relative kind of pulley system that is, you know, living in life and being, that I think that if we I like the idea of bringing this more into our regular work. I think that's why I like so much of Greg's other work, is that it has this natural feel to it that doesn't have this mechanistic, just
Yeah.
reductionistic piece that
Yeah.
you walk away from thinking man is a machine, you know,
Yeah.
and you start thinking more in terms of, you know, us being in and with and part of the nature of everything.
Mhm.
And there's something visceral and just surreal about that I like.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And that's
think
got to be interesting
Greg's
work.
got a good way of doing that, and talking about things like that, and kind of making everything seem simple in like kind of the processes and the theories, but at the same time then being able to individualize that and make it work for people.
But I think even the way that you've been describing it this whole time, and that it's not some static black and white thing. There are no just, I mean, you can target and isolate you know, some specific things that might be
Mm-hmm.
mitigating, or like acute problems that are causing whatever issue you're having in regard to this.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, when it boils down to it, it's really more about establishing a more broader, holistic routine and set of behaviors and contingencies that feed to this.
Yeah.
um,
It's
and
it's a lot of
it's,
antecedent control.
yeah, I like the idea of that,
Highlights a lot of
actually.
the non-linearness of life, right? Like it's
Yeah.
all these other things
Yeah,
that feed into that sleep.
I mean that's the
Mm-hmm.
thing. Like I think that because that's so, going back to that Hayes and Dixon paper, that's what I did appreciate about that paper more than anything, is
That's what
that,
you get from an inner behavioral perspective, like they offer.
right,
They will
like
they
bringing
will go,
field
yep,
theory
yep,
field theory into behavior is different, because it kind of gives this notion of gravitational pull in life, where there are invisible forces pulling and pulling on us, that are
hmm,
actual natural forces, but they're not available to the naked eye.
yeah. They're really hard to
And like when you're
measure,
talking about MO
conceptualize.
manipulation, you know, MO manipulation is one of those things, or MOs are one of those things that we don't think about it in terms of existing on a gradient,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
There is no quantified whole number plus or minus MO behavioral state.
And
Yeah.
how she was describing, like your gradient can actually like change throughout the day. Like those gradients slide up and down, right? When you were
Yeah.
Right.
talking
Yeah.
about your sleep there just a minute
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, and the base level is, and that's an interesting too. So it's not even necessarily even relative to a particular state or of deprivation or satiation. There is a natural rhythm
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
your biology
Yeah.
experiences
Yeah,
that's
there's
totally
sort of
different.
certain biological things that you have to contend with when you're talking about changing sleep as behavior. And that's why I keep coming back to that book, is it does a really good job of kind of explaining the biology of sleep so that you can then figure out kind of how you can work around that, as a behavior analyst trying to treat behavior to
Hmm.
make sleep better.
What are some of the most common issues in try? You said you do a lot of webinars and stuff. What are
Yeah.
some of the most common just errors or challenges that you see practitioners encounter when they're trying to understand what you're talking about? Or do you? Or,
Um, I think in trying to figure out how to actually take what they've learned, because I feel like I always at the end of sleep webinars, people are like, wow, that made so much sense. And I never thought of sleep like that. And I get it. And then 2 weeks later, I start getting a bunch of questions of like, so I have a client that's doing this and I've tried this and this and this. I'm like, oh, okay, well, you're still missing the boat on like what the main points are and what the main things you need to focus on are. And it always comes back to the same things. It's you have to manipulate MOs, you have to manipulate SDs, you have to look at interfering behavior. And the interfering behavior you get to do all of the things with, like you can manipulate the consequences, the SDs, the MOs.
Is this your
So
slide on that?
yeah, that's it. Those are there's four main causes of sleep problems that we come back to every time. And so people email me about like individual problems that somebody's having. I'm like, well, you still got to go back to those four main sleep problems because it all comes
Hmm.
from that. And like nighttime awakenings, I don't ever target like the nighttime awakening in and of itself. It's all targeting the things that are happening when they're falling asleep, because if
Hmm.
you teach good sleep hygiene and good behavior leading up to falling asleep, that gets rid of all of the other things. It gets rid of the night awakenings. It gets rid of nightmares and night terrors. It gets rid of waking up to have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It gets rid of the early morning awakenings. It gets rid of the co-sleeping. So it all comes back to the same kinds of things treatment wise.
I think
I
that's
never.
such a critical piece. I'm sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. I'm sorry, Ryan, if you
I
have
was
something to say.
just, I was gonna say I never know how far this is gonna go, but we're just gonna blast this out there and start pushing people your way. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're definitely going to push people your way for sure. But I think that the critical thing that for me that's very important that anybody who's listening to this takes away from our discussion today is that, and this is a common theme in our podcast that we try to push for. Honestly, it's kind of like our mission here is that we got to stop thinking about behavior as these acute instances of movement cycles
Yeah.
that are exclusive to that
Yep.
particular point in time and that particular moment in space. Like
Hmm.
Hmm.
it's so reductionistic and erroneous
Yeah.
in terms of efficacy and just actually representing nature in reality.
Hmm.
If you want to be a natural, forget scientists, because scientist implies that you're doing experiments and you're taking data. If you just want to be an empirically minded practitioner, then like having being able to tackle more difficult complex problems like this have to do with understanding first principles and having a good grasp of the conceptual basis for why we do what we do and what
Yeah.
influences
Exactly.
create the conditions to occasion particular responses.
Yeah.
And that means not necessarily doing an infinite amount of reading or ridiculous amount of reading, but it has to do with bringing in some more of that creative thinking when it comes to interpreting behavioral events, because
Hmm.
that's another issue is that we hammer people, we hammer the 3 term, we hammer the 4 term contingency into people's minds and hearts and souls and graduate programs, and the BACB task list is set to that, and that's so cool. But I mean, even from my own doctoral journey, what I'm learning is that the more and more, the deeper and deeper you get into appreciating and understand what creates the conditions of behavior, the more
Hmm.
and more elusive that thing becomes. The
Yeah.
more and more
Especially
you see
when
the art in it.
Yeah, when you get into like the different levels of selection and like thinking about how that plays into every behavior, and like you can never just look at one instance of behavior and understand that one instance of behavior. And it's the same thing that you were just saying. When I talk to people about sleep problems, I almost could design the sleep treatment for people without knowing anything about the sleep problems, because it always comes back to those same four main things that I'm targeting. And whenever I'm doing a sleep assessment and treatment for kids, especially kids on the spectrum, my treatment plan, like I said before, I have a template that I follow, and I like fill in individual details and make it work for the family and what I think they're going to be able to actually follow through with. But it's the same things. Like, we have a consistent bedtime routine, so we make sure we're getting all the right SDs in place. We have a consistent sleep schedule. We get rid of interfering behavior. We get rid of bad sleep dependencies like co-sleeping with a parent, or having a parent laying there rubbing your back when you're falling asleep, or having a phone in your hand, or whatever it
Hmm.
may be. And then we also think a little bit about the biological pieces and make sure that we're doing things like exercising and getting the right amount of sleep, and not drinking a whole bunch of liquid before you go to bed, and
Yeah.
not eating a big meal. And it's really that simple. And it comes back to like, it doesn't really matter necessarily what the topography of the problem is. It matters that we're tackling the right things for this kind of
Hmm.
overall big picture. And it's always this comprehensive approach. It's never like, okay, let's tackle this specific behavior.
Yeah.
I almost need to know what the specific behaviors are.
That's what happens when you take a functional approach and you get it down to like a good behavioral technology, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
That's
so you
sweet.
take the red pill and you stop the matrix. Marvelous.
Yes. Marvelous, right?
That was marvelous.
Marvelous.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Keira. This was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This was
it's been
fantastic.
fun. I love talking about sleep. This won't be out in time, but I have a sleep webinar with BDS next week, and it's the one that you guys have the slides for. But
Okay, cool.
I'll
Can,
hopefully be doing those pretty regularly with them.
we'll link the slides for folks if that's all right, so they can check it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So a lot of what was talked about, and some of the things we even talk about on some of the prevalence rates of different things, where I saw that were in there, and backup, like references and support for some of the discussions we made as
Yeah,
well. So anybody that's listening, check that out. There's a lot of cool stuff there,
Yeah.
and more behavioral consulting. What's your website, or like best way to
It is
contact you?
morebehaviorconsulting.com.
Bam. Check that
That's
out.
it.
You have a
I
great
also have a
Facebook page too.
Oh, thank you. I'm almost up to 500 followers. I saw today.
$4.99.
Nice.
Yeah, $4.99. So if anyone hasn't liked it, you can give me to 500.
Yeah,
My
I love your Facebook
page
page.
is more behavior consulting, I think, and that is dedicated to sleep stuff. Even though I do more than sleep stuff.
I'm number 500. I just clicked like.
Yes, I've been
I was gonna
watching
say,
it
I'll-
every
I'll
day,
give
and
you
I'm
the
like, I can't
500.
wait. Yeah, so I post a lot of regular sleep content there. It's geared more towards families that have kids with sleep problems, but a lot of stuff that's relevant for anybody.
So for those behavior analysts out there on furlough or layoff or just in
Yeah.
general home with their kids thinking suicide might be the answer, but really you just need a good night's sleep, you should
Check
hit
me
up
out.
Kira.
Yeah, I do.
You just got 501. There you go.
Cool,
I do
yeah, 'cause
free
you said
initial consultations with people if they want to just talk it out and see if it's something that they even need my help with, or sometimes it's just a really simple, like I can point them in the right direction,
Yeah.
or I can say like, hey, I got a webinar coming up, but that might be
Yeah.
useful. I also have a mailing list. I don't have a way to automatically put people on it yet because I'm not that great with technology. But if
Mhm.
anybody wants to get on my mailing list, it's mostly to let people know when there are events coming up,
Cool.
or webinars or whatever. So people can message me through my website or through Facebook, and I can add them to the mailing list.
Cool. And you said this is a telehealth model right now, right? So people can reach
I
out to
do
you despite their
even without
location.
COVID. Yeah, even without COVID, I do everything through telehealth because for sleep,
Sweet.
I'm
Yep.
not the one being there anyway. So
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's awesome. So super accessible right now.
yeah,
Sweet.
exactly.
Cool. Thank you. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You guys are fun to talk to. You know a lot.